Well, a very good afternoon to you. Welcome to the studios of Joy News. And if you see me here at this time, it's because of the Joy News pre-budget forum that we're having. And despite swearing never to return to the IMF after the 16th program for a bailout, Ghana returned to the fund for a 17th program. We are in that program. This afternoon, we contemplate the effects, a painful debt restructuring program, and aggressive tax reforms which have brought untold hardships to businesses and consumers. Now, expectations are high as the government prepares its 2023 half-year budget. But what are the expectations of business and industry? This edition of the Joy Business Thought Leadership Series seeks to examine the impact of Ghana's 17th IMF program and the government's policy initiatives to revive the economy in the mid-year budget review. Well, my colleague George joins me on Joy 99.7 FM in the studio, and he will also be telling us a bit more about what we can expect. George, a very good afternoon to you if you can hear me. All right, so we'll start from the studios of Joy News with the guests we have in here. First off, we have, just to announce the generality of the guests we have, Mark Bedu-Aboagye. He is CEO of the Ghana National Chamber of Commerce Industry as well, together with Edward Karewe of GAU, the Ghana Agricultural Workers Union. We also have Professor Godfred Bokpin of the University of Ghana Business School. Some of them will be joining us via Zoom. Professor Bokpin is one of them. And then in the Joy News studio, I will be hosting right in here Dr. Joseph Obeng, or Joseph Obeng for short. He is president of GUTA, the Ghana Union of Traders Association. Also on board, Dr. Humphrey Ayim-Dake, president, Association of Ghana Industries. And on this beat, we'll also be joined on Zoom by Yao Apialati, partner financial advisory, and Nuong Falong, CEO of Etheria, who is a businesswoman. Now we'll start the discussion right here in the studios of Joy News. But before we get into it, gentlemen, a very good afternoon. I think almost in the military, I should put you at ease, gentlemen. It's because of the fireworks in here before we started. I'll start with you, Joseph Obeng. We're in the throes of an IMF program, the 17th one that we have had. You could even say consecutively, back to back to back. The times are rough. But we were told, the impression was created that once we had the program, things would begin to settle and things would look much better. After the program, after getting this program, what has been your reaction from the end of GUTA in terms of the business you do, import and export, if you like? Import more or less, and then selling to the generality of the people.
Thank you very much. What we should know is that the IMF program is not an end to itself. It brought along its own packages. And even the fact that we're having our own problems even before going to the IMF means that we have also encountered another set of problems even by adopting to go to the IMF. What the IMF seeks to do is to bring some stability to us. Otherwise, all other things remain the same. We should be able to adopt measures that will mitigate the plight of businesses as we were suffering before going into the IMF itself. Now, IMF have come. It brought in its own advantages, and definitely for businesses, it also brought some conditionalities that may not also help the cause of businesses. If you look at the latter part of 2022, most businesses suffered a lot. Most of our capitals were depleted, over 50%.
Over 50%?
Yes, that accounts to the reason why they are saying that the port is empty now. The port is empty, or the traffic is lessened, because the volumes that we used to bring have dwindled, because our capitals has also dwindled or depleted, about half. So if we're able to bring about 4 containers, of course, and your capital is halved, then of course you'll be only able to bring about 2 containers.
2 of them.
That's the reason why the port is quite empty these days, as we all been.
Is that still the situation? Because the arrival of the $600 million was supposed to also cushion the Ghana cedi. Has that happened? We all know the rates on the market. They are still hovering around 12 cedis.
If you lose
and
money,
the central bank's rate is slightly lower.
If you lose money, you've already lost it. I'm telling you, last quarter of the year, as I said, our capitals got depleted about 50%. It means that if even we have gotten some stability, you are not going to get back your lost capital. So we still have the effects. And so coming from that time, and then also, we also saw the inflation going to the highest, about 53%. If you look, you also look at the interest rate that we are paying. Borrowing costs have gone up astronomically high, to about over 35 to 40%. And these are all indicators that do not let businesses thrive. And then we also engaged IMF. The effects, the negative impact of IMF and its conditionalities is such that we have to introduce new taxes. About 3
Tax
huge, as I always call, obnoxious taxes were also imposed on us. VAT had gone up from 3% flat rate that we were paying, have gone up to cumulatively about 22%. Then we have other utilities to contend with. Utility charges have also gone up about over 50%. Last 2 quarters have seen the utility prices going up over 50%. So if you are doing business at this time, then you see that you are in a difficulty, because the inflation that we are experiencing simply means that the consuming public, their purchasing power has also gone down, and cost of doing business have also gone up. It means that the ability to buy have been curtailed, and businesses thrive on turnover, and our turnover is diminished to a point that you are unable to even service your credit. And
diminishing returns may be kicking in.
Businesses.
And of course, if you purchase products and no one buys them, it means you're stuck with the products. It means your liquidity is also stuck in there. But let me just quickly run these 2 by you before I go to Dr. Ayim Dake. So the exchange rate, has it helped any? Is it any better for the business community comparatively to, let's say, the end of last year when we're really in the throes of it? And again, inflation. We've seen a slight uptick in inflation. It was receding, and all of a sudden, it started inching up, not as high as it was last year. What do these 2 factors mean for business?
Yeah, normally, when there's stability in the currency, it means that it has to also translate into the prices in the market.
Are you seeing that with this?
If it is not happening like that, it means that the gains in the stability, and mind you, this stability is not long-lived. It's a short term, because if you say stability of the currency, then we are expecting that it has been there for quite a longer period, that we cannot just measure about 3 months stability and take it. And then the gains that we would have gotten from this stability is being taken away by the high cost of doing business, the taxes that have been imposed on us, the benchmark reduction policy that have made duty prices gone up, and so many other costs of doing business. A COVID levy should not be there, because the COVID is no more. And all these cost items are there, special import levies. It was introduced during the previous administration that it is being used for temporal purposes for a relief, and that after the sun set, it will be removed. The sun has never set, and it is still on the table. So cumulatively, these prices, that's why we said that the kind of inflation that we're experiencing now is a cost-push one. It's a cost-push inflation. And that's why even when there's some kind of stability in the exchange is still not transferring. A government statistician, he said that this inflation is pushed by import, the high cost of imports. What does it tell you? It means that the cost of doing business have translated into the pricing of commodities in the market.
So if I pose the simple question to you, the business community, Guta, your members, are you better off now compared to before the IMF deal? What would you say?
No, if you look at the stability of the currency, then we say that because in fact, the depreciation of the cedi had a toll on businesses.
Right.
And so having achieved some kind of stability is good for us. But what we still have to do is to prune down most of the cost items in doing business, especially at the port, and also the new taxes that are come. We have to restructure the VAT, which does not bring uniformity and which is not helping compliance and all that. And then it has also pushed the prices up unnecessarily.
All right. Let's also hear from Dr. Ayim Dake. Let's find out about the state of our industries. He, of course, is president of the Ghana Association of Ghana Industries. Doc, thank you so much for joining the conversation. Now, almost 3 months into the IMF program, what is the state of industries from your end as we speak?
All right, thank you. And to say, in the context of the recent macroeconomic difficulties, yes, it is no news to say that, yes, businesses and industry was stressed.
Right.
Still stressed in the context. Yes, the role of the IMF, as their mandate indicates, is to bring about some stability in the macro front. Yes, to that effect, we know the exchange rate has behaved reasonably well within the last 3 months, and therefore it has brought about some seeming confidence in the business community and reasonability in prediction and planning of our various engagement. So yes, our businesses have been stressed within the context of the macro. They led to a lot of contraction into our business operation. It led to low growth. It led to low unemployment. You can also trace that it led to the distortion of original business model of processing and manufacturing, where you realize that by virtue of these macro indicators, a number of businesses resorted to importation of finished product as against processing and producing, and its relevant impact in terms of job creation, taxation, and it's exposed the country to a lot of informality. And there are consequences of a high informal sector in an economy, at least developing economy. So these ramifications are all associated with the gains and the minuses of what we've gone through over the period. And therefore, yes, our businesses are stressed, but by virtue of the IMF transaction, restored confidence to which we are planning effectively. And we look forward to other indicators that are work in progress, because the IMF process is not a one-time transaction, it's a process. We need to go back into the inflationary rates. What do we need to do regarding the inflationary rate? You asked my colleague about the effect of the inflation on our businesses. And that, I mean, every player in the space knows that the higher the inflation, the challenges it is to businesses. Nonetheless, our concern is how is Bank of Ghana managing the inflationary issues. And we know they've deployed a number of tools to aid, curtail the inflationary figures. Nonetheless, the producer price index and the run-through effect of some tax adjustment has also led to the state of the inflation. We've also argued out on the inflation targeting model that the Bank of Ghana uses. Nonetheless, we still believe that there are structural rigidities that needs to be tackled. And those are the engagement we seek to see the finance minister table in the midterm budget, complementing it with that of the IMF policy and report to aid us navigate these difficult macroeconomic factors that we face.
And these are very turbulent matters. Dr. Ayim Dake, I'll be coming back to you shortly. But let me welcome aboard, joining the conversation, Professor Godfred Bokpin. He is an economist and lecturer of finance at the University of Ghana Business School. Prof, a very good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to your cherished listeners. Thank you.
It's a pleasure having you join the conversation. I'd like to start off with you before we come back into the studio. Now, we have GUTA and the AGI represented here. They've been talking about the dynamics, the IMF program, the effect of taxes that have been added on, utility price hikes. They've also spoken about what this has meant for the business community. But from where you sit, looking at everything that is happening, the projections that you made ahead of the IMF program, would you say that the business community is better off now comparatively to before the IMF program? Now, inflation has receded, but in the last 2 months, we've seen a bit of an uptick. When it comes to our local currency, it's still hovering around 12 cedis to the dollar out there. Have we made any progress on the back of receiving the $600 million from the IMF?
Okay, we know that the way we were heading pre-IMF program, we were heading dangerously. We needed an external anchor, and we found that in the form of IMF supported program. It was very clear to us that the IMF program will not deliver an instant dividend. Our problems wasn't going to disappear overnight simply because we had signed up onto the IMF program. It was very clear to us that signing up onto the IMF program means work. We have to get back to work. We also knew that there was a price, or there is a price that we have to pay in order to restore macroeconomic stability. And that is quite basic, because you cannot restore macroeconomic stability without paying the appropriate price. Now, the reason businesses are feeling the impact the more is that we are shifting the adverse distributional effect of the program disproportionately to households and businesses, when it should have been loaded on maybe growth-enhancing expenditure cuts, which government failed to do. So the broad policy framework, you see that the necessary fiscal adjustment that we have to do, limited though, is heavily based on revenue enhancement and not greater expenditure cuts in terms of wasteful expenditure cuts. And that is why the approach the government has adopted in the fiscal consolidation effort, which is needed, is what is causing that disproportionate effect to businesses and households. It's an approach government has adopted in reaching the same point. So, and the program, we are very clear under the program that in the immediate, there is going to be a price, there's going to be a trade-off. And the trade-off will come in the form of the fact that growth will decelerate, and also the fiscal consolidation measures or the fiscal adjustment, the utility price adjustment plan under the program is going to affect businesses and households in the immediate. But then in the medium to the long term, we expect that growth will rebound, and then growth will be maybe probably inclusive, and we rope them in. How the approach we have adopted is suboptimal. And that is why we agree with the private sector that the approach government has adopted under the program would disproportionately affect the private sector and undermine private sector competitiveness, and that is a cause for concern for us. And also, whilst we have advocated for expenditure cuts, the kind of expenditure cut government has done under the program is actually not the kind of expenditure cut we had wished. Okay.
What kind of expenditure cuts would you have wanted to see?
We were expecting more of the government reducing the size, merging some ministries, some agencies, departments, and then costing that, and probably we may achieve the same goal, okay, by reducing those expenditure as compared to increasing taxes, introducing new taxes, and increasing rates of existing taxes.
Professor Bokpin, let me just take you on there. Let me just take you on there briefly. In terms of our tax bracket, you already know how much we rake in vis-a-vis our budgets for every year. And it's been said, this government has said time and again that, listen, just cutting off a few ministers is not going to cut it. It's not going to make any difference. How much do the ministers earn? How much do they consume on fuel and all of that? So is it realistic when you call for this and say that it would have maybe amounted to some of what we would be looking for in terms of our tax returns and all of that? How realistic is that?
If you look at it from the approach you are coming from, we are majoring on the minor. We are not just asking reducing the number of ministers. We are talking about ministries. We are talking about departments, we are talking about agencies, and also rationalizing state-owned enterprises. In other words, the cost of our governance is just too much for our national budget to sustain. And if we don't do something drastic about that, it's not just reducing the number of ministers. This requires a comprehensive reform. This requires consensus building. Okay, we need to decide how many ministries do we want to have, how many departments, agencies, state-owned enterprises. You look at the employee size, okay, of some of the state-owned enterprises in the last 7-8 years. Some of them have doubled. We have created deputy minister positions with quite rewarding remuneration package. But what is the value addition? So it's not just ministers. We are looking at the entire value chain. We are looking at the cost of governance. Okay, the way we are operationalizing our democracy is too expensive. And it's the private sector and households that are bearing the cost. And that is not sustainable. That's the point that we are making. We are not just saying that reduce the number of ministers. Of course, it's a good signal. Why should Ghana be governing with more than 80 ministers? Where is the output that justifies that number? Okay, so if we continue like this, we are only making the burden harder. And it's going to be difficult freeing up cash flow in order to spend in the areas of growth enhancing, like CAPEX. We don't have roads, poor infrastructure.
Right.
The government is cutting down CAPEX. If you look at the expenditure cut under the program, we are hoping to make fiscal savings of 0.9% from CAPEX cut. We are limiting hiring, we are limiting wages, we are rationalizing goods and services, but these are really not the areas we are looking at. So Ghana needs to take another look at the way we are operationalizing our democracy.
Right.
It's too expensive and it's beyond what the private sector and households can contain.
Let me ask you,
and
Prof.
finally, let me say this.
Right.
Yes.
You were going to make a final point. So you go ahead.
Yes. It is not true that Ghana is not developing because our tax to GDP ratio is low. There are other countries like Malaysia and Singapore who have developed on the back of to GDP ratio that's less than 15%. So if you look at our tax to GDP ratio the last 15 years, if we were efficient and we were tackling corruption, the tax to GDP ratio we have collected in the last 15 years should have been able to give us a development outcome far better than where we are now. So nobody should buy the argument that Ghana is in a mess because we are not generating enough tax revenue or relative to the size of the economy. It is not true. It is the corruption, the inefficiency, the large government size across ministers, department agencies, state-owned enterprises, largely inefficient. That is where the problem is. If you do the modeling and you see your tax to GDP ratio at the level where we are, this is not where Ghana should be. So
let's tackle the solutions to the problems rather than re-echo the problems. I just want to do this before I cross over to Nuong Falong, CEO of Theria. But for you, Prof, just briefly on this, do you anticipate a review of the macro targets to reflect what is on the ground? Because basically, we know that we're facing a turbulent turn. Do you expect a reduction in the growth rate target, for example, for the year?
Yeah, typically, I'm sure there will be some level of revision to the macro targets. The government, particularly for inflation, government was hoping to achieve inflation, year-end inflation of 18.9%. That looks almost difficult to reach now. So certainly there will be some kind of rationalization in there and to reflect reality. Again, also when it comes to our revenue performance and all of that, I believe that there will be some kind of intervention from there. But at the end of the day, we have to be realistic, and then the approach we adopt in reaching debt sustainability and all of that must take into consideration private sector competitiveness. But at the end of the day, what I just want to put across is that we should all just understand that where we find ourselves, there's not going to be a quick fix. The recovery is going to be slow, it's going to be a bit painful, but we have to be patient. But whilst we are asking for patience, it also requires our leaders to do the right thing, and we have to adopt a lean approach, a lean government towards addressing our problems. Other than that, more revenue only guarantees greater abuse.
Just hold for me, Prof. Let me bring in Nuong Falong, who is CEO of Etheria. Now, you operate in the beauty industry. I'd like to find out from you, how has this predicament in terms of our economy impacted your business? Have you, for example, contemplated shutting down your business or downsizing? And let me just add, how is the current tax regime affecting your business, Nuong?
For looping me into the conversation, I'd just like to say hello to my Professor Bokpin. I was going to touch on some of his submissions, but I'll come to that later. Specifically for a business in the beauty industry, have we had to downsize? Have we had to restructure because of the present economic situation? I think a lot of businesses will honestly tell you it's been difficult, especially when you have a lot of people's disposable income dropping and their ability to purchase your products reduced less and less. We have had to restructure, let go certain permanent staff, yes. What we've done is, instead of just letting them go completely, because we need them, we're not letting them go because we don't need them. It's because we cannot afford to keep paying them. So what we do is we make them temporary staff, or we make them contract staff. So instead of paying them every month, which is a burden, you try to reduce that monthly expenditure by paying them only when you contract them, or only when you use them in production or in other services that your business needs.
So it then means that, yes, you are feeling the impact. What have been your coping mechanisms, just before I go to Studio 997?
The coping has been to reduce the size, the staff size, because we can't afford to pay all of them month on month.
By about how much have you downsized?
5 people.
And what does that mean in terms of the real numbers you have?
It means that we are not able to produce as quickly as we do. It also means that if we get an order today that requires us to supply tomorrow, it's going to take a longer turnaround time, because we do not have all the hands that we typically use. So you'll find that we are a little slower. Sometimes responses are also a little slower because people send you messages, are expecting responses from the business, and you don't have all the staff that you used to have before. We've also had to let go. Initially, we had an accountant. Now, what we do is we get someone to come in and look at the books occasionally, because we cannot afford to pay an accountant every month. And instead, we are using accounting apps, So these are the ways in which we try to adapt.
Well, do hold for me, Nuong, lady and gentlemen. Let's cross over now to Studio 997, where my colleague George Weafe is standing by with another batch of guests to kickstart the conversation on radio. Over to you, George.
Very much, Benjamin Akakpo. And if you just join us, this is our pre-mid-year budget discussion here at Joy Business live on Joy 99.7 FM and also on the Joy News channel, and getting the views of industry persons in terms of what is their expectation? How's the economy doing as we ramp up or get ahead to the mid-year budget review that will be done by the Finance Minister, Ken Ofori-Atta, next week. I have with me here Edward Karewa. He's the General Secretary of the General Agricultural Workers Union, and also Magbedu Abuaji, Chief Executive of the Ghana National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. But before I even getting your thoughts about the expectation, I wanted to find out from you, in terms of sectorial performance, how are your members doing? Mark, National Chamber of Commerce and Industry, how are things as we speak right now?
Things are very hard, and of course we're actually expecting it because of the things that are happening now. Let me give you a clear example. For the past 3 weeks, I've been visiting some of our members within the manufacturing sector, and George, the situation is bad. You could see the devastating impact of whatever is going on businesses. Some have cut down production, and one typical firm that I visited has closed down totally because it's not able to pay electricity.
Interesting.
Yes, and these are real things that if you go
so
on the ground,
what has happened to their workers?
They've been laid off. When I went to that particular, it's a cocoa processing company. Huge plant sitting down doing virtually nothing. Investment had gone into that plant, and if you see the face of the businessman, I asked myself, is this man able to eat or sleep? Because you have this investment and it's not producing anything because the cost of electricity had gone up to that extent that you cannot pay. Then definitely it's very difficult. And it cut across all the sectors. And for me, this clearly reflected in the GDP numbers that was released in the first quarter of this year. And if you look at it,
manufacturing is not doing well.
Yes, all the subsectors that are being impacted by the high utility tariffs, by taxes, and by high interest rates, they all contracted. But these are the sectors that we need to drive the economy. Those sectors that recorded growth are health, education, they are support sectors. If this manufacturing sector is not doing well, if the construction sector is not doing well, if the retail and wholesale sector also contracted, you know the economy of Ghana basically relies on buy and sell. And if those sectors are all going down, that means that there's something fundamentally wrong that we have to look at.
Mr. Abuaji, I mean, I'll come back to you, but let me quickly get to Mr. Karewa as well, the General Agricultural Workers Union as well. And you guys actually make sure that we get food on our table. And we've not gotten to that point yet. From the GDP numbers, the suggestion was that things are doing well and all the rest. In terms of as I asked him, the state of the industry, how is the agri sector doing when it comes to workers, when it comes to production, these huge rest?
Well, just like there's no market, and all the challenges you can talk about production, inputs are very, very high. Land preparation is very high. Anything you just have to touch for production is very high. Labor cost itself is also very high. You know, and not to talk about the fact that there are now new and emerging, you know, enemies of agriculture, where the fundamentals of agriculture, that is land, is being destroyed completely. You know, Galamsey is doing a very huge devastation to agricultural basis because, one, agriculture is based on land, agriculture is based on water. You know, all those things are being destroyed permanently, not even temporary. So even if you have resources and you want to go into agriculture, you may not even be able to get the type of land that you want. The other part has to do with the estate development. You know, they develop indiscriminately. You know, we need houses to live in, but then who checks what? You know, all those things are indeed encroaching on the capacity of the industry to grow and then farmers' ability to be able to produce.
If you have just joined us, you are live on Joy 99.7 FM and also on Joy News. This is our pre-budget discussion here at Joy Business as you look at the economic transformation. What should be the policy direction be in the 2023 mid-year budget review that the Finance Minister, Ken Ofori-Atta, will be presenting to Parliament that is come next week? Mr. Magbodo Abaji, let me also come back to you about getting your views on this budget. Even before we quickly get into that one, I mean, you are an association, not an individual. How are you getting or mirroring the challenge right now to those who matter in terms of those who are managing the policy space? Because, listen, some measures were taken by government in their quest to improve revenue. This is the end results. I mean, some would say that the same thing, e-levy, something happened and they went back to the necessary correction. How are you taking these concerns to government, lining up or getting into the mid-year budget review, so that if there are even any plans to increase the rates or maybe bring in new taxes as well, they might think twice about it before they implement those things?
Well, economic development and transformation is a partnership between the private sector and government. Government has a role to play. The private sector also has a role to play. The core role of government to ensure that the right environment is created. So whatever policy they are bringing out definitely may have impact on businesses. So that platform should be created for us to be able to engage and for us to be able to voice out the difficulties that businesses are going through. I think that platform for me is at the moment not too good, because when these issues came up, we complained a lot. We actually sent a petition to the office of the president, together with other business associations. They turned a deaf ear to us. We have, as businesses, one of our core functions is advocacy, and we will continue to do that. We have had cause to also meet with some of the policymakers to explain the difficulties that businesses are going through. Recently, I think last week, we had opportunity to meet with the IMF team that is working on the mid-term revenue policy, and they were surprised on the challenges that we are going through. We have told them that the same kind of cow that you are milking, you are not feeding that particular cow, but you want the cow to give you more milk. How do you expect the cow to do that?
That could be a very fat cow.
Yes, no, we have over-milked the cow to the extent that the cow is on the verge of death.
No.
And something must be done immediately. For which reason, in this particular budget, taxes are some of the things that they should totally refrain from. Because before these 3 new taxes, we had complained that the existing ones were still not helping businesses, and they have introduced new ones. The effect is there. It's important that they listen to us. It is in the interest of even the managers of the economy to listen. Because if you take a typical tax, it has 2 purposes. One is to generate revenue. The other one is to use it as an incentive to help businesses to grow. We have all the time concentrated on using taxes to generate revenue. So every revenue we want to generate is taxes. And these taxes are being paid by only few. We have said it, that out of the 15 million Ghanaians and institutions that are supposed to pay taxes, only 5 million are paying. And because they are identifiable, you can see them. George is here, this company is here. It's so easy, and it's a lazy approach of actually increasing tax revenue. If you are able to get those who are not paying to pay, we would rather increase the tax revenue and not imposing new taxes.
But Mr. Bedouadi, how do we deal with this challenge that has always come up from the proponents of these taxes about the fact that when you do a comparison, as in the tax, i.e. in relation to the economic activities that are taking place in the economy, it doesn't match. You look at all these activities and that level is low as well. I'll come back to you quickly to get your thought as well. But Mr. Karowe, I mean, the sector, interesting. Your thoughts on this whole argument about tax in relation to our GDP is low, and therefore it makes a strong case to increase these levies, these margins, these taxes to deal with the revenue shortfall.
Well, I think that we are applying an outmoded economic development policies to try to develop ourselves. You know, if we think that we can still go with this fixation that you can generate revenue by increasing your taxes and tax the same people all the time, certainly it is telling us that it's not working. You know, yes, revenue will automatically come up, and it will come up when your capacity to generate the revenue is strengthened, you know. But it's not just about how much you are going to tax the person that would necessarily translate into your revenue. When the person does not have capacity to do what? To contain that tax. You know, so I would think that we need to review our economic policy to know that tax is good to generate revenue, but tax should not be the first call to generate revenue. It is rather to empower production to go on. Unfortunately, the figures as we receive them from the Statistical Service are not giving good account of what is happening in production. You know, all the productive areas are declining, and yet they are the very people that you are taxing. You know, and as I indicated also, it seems they are not interested in getting to those who are not paying taxes at all. You know,
because it's easier to go after the Mr. Magbedu Abuaji and then you as well.
Yes, of course. I pay my taxes all the time, you know, and any consumption I do, I pay taxes on it, you know, and even people who I give money to feed also pay taxes on it. So all the time, even when you are sleeping, you pay tax. When you are awake, you pay tax. You pay tax in the morning, you pay tax in the afternoon, you pay tax anywhere you go, you pay tax. You know, and that is not how you can grow the economy. I think that we need a national discourse to actually fashion out an appropriate economic development policy for this country. You know, the way we are moving on and thinking that it is only taxes that can generate the revenue that we need, of course, we are killing businesses all over. Look, we are concerned as workers in the agri sector to ensure that the companies survive, because it is when they are able to generate revenue that we can also demand all the things that we need.
You're worried that the increment and better working conditions, they are under threat because most of these businesses are not doing well, and even in your area as well.
Yes, and let me give this example. Look, your trade policies are not aligning with your production policies. There are producers in this country, and for instance, rubber production. Companies have invested to set up factories to produce more rubber. Now they cannot even get the rubber as a raw material.
Interesting.
Meanwhile, we have enough rubber produced within the country, which could be used to feed these factories. But another policy has come to say that you can export the rubber raw. So people come in and just export that rubber, and you leave your own industries to struggle for raw material to process. You know,
how do we deal with that challenge? Because it appears that it's not just even about the rubber, but even the commodities as well. We have these big multinationals coming in and competing with us to get some of these stuff to other neighboring countries and all the rest. As we also still try and look into the media review as well, what should be the policy direction in dealing with this challenge, where we've opened up the market so much, so these big commodity trading firms are coming in, buying the corn, the rice and everything, and then taking everything out, and we are even struggling to get some to eat as well. What should be the policy direction going forward in dealing with this challenge?
You see, I think that we have lost direction, excuse me to put it that way. Because even if on the liberalization, you still have areas that you say, no, I will not allow open competition there. But we don't seem to have that at all. Everywhere, please just allow the imports to come in. What we need to do is to identify those areas. And we already know them, you know, and I don't know how we can proceed with governance without political will to do what we have to do. Because, you know, taking decisions requires what? Political willpower, whether economic or whatever form it is. We need to say, no, We have got our own industries we want to grow. And you see, it's not just that we are giving money to people because they are in business. Because those who are in business, who are manufacturing, who are producing, they are not only making revenue for themselves alone, but they are generating employment. You see, and sometimes they even take employment to where it is most needed. For instance, the companies I'm talking about, they are in the rural areas. All of us know the rural-urban migration, what it is causing to us in the cities here, the Kaya Minas. They take jobs there, then you don't even support them at all. Then you allow people who just come to buy the raw materials and take them away. That, I think, is not a matter that we can say that we don't know how to go about it. It's just that we are failing to do it. And if we are using budget to, correct some of these policy anomalies, then this mid-year budget must bring in its work decisions that we are banning A, B, C, D. We all know. You know that until just this year's budget, that is the 2023 budget, look at the discounted benchmark value, what it has done to industry in this country. Then later on, we have abandoned it, but the harm has already been done.
Mr. Kara, your sector has a lot of policy measures that is supposed to help triple its growth. I mean, going into this budget, which one do you think has to be tweaked or reviewed? You have plenty for food and jobs and all that. I'll be coming back to you to get your thoughts about which of these policy measures should we take a second look at for the next half of the year and also going into 2024. But back to Mr. Magbedua Budget on the bit about utility tariffs. It appears that under this, we're having our own debate in studio before we went on about whether Ghana really needed an IMF program or not. And it's like way back in school debate, those who are for and against. But the bit about tariffs, what should be the plan going forward? Because from the fund program, it appears that there is an attempt to have a full cost recovery. Already, you are telling me that some of your members are shutting down.
Well, from Studio 997, thank you, George. We're back in the studios of Joy News, and my guest still with me, Professor Bokpin Nuwam-Falong. We also have here in the studio Joseph Obeng of GUTA and Dr. Humphrey Ayim-Dake of the AGI. I'll start with you, Dr. Ayim-Dake. Now, some interesting points that were made by Mark Beduabaji of the GNCCI. He says, we've milked the tax cow to the point of death. We should desist from any further taxes. Just today, I've heard you talk about the COVID-19 levy and then the 3 new tax handles or tweaked tax handles, if you like. From that standpoint, what do you think is our reality? When the Vice President now said back then we should move from taxation to production, what is our reality currently in the midst of this IMF program? Very quickly on that.
All right, thank you. Picking it from where Mark mentioned it, and there was one other question that was asked: how are we engaging government on all these position papers that we have? Yes, we write a lot of position papers. Our role as a trade association is to do lobbying, and therefore we go out there, lobby the technical persons that advise the minister. We have engagement with the minister, and a couple of weeks ago, last week thereabout, we met the IMF team. We lay bare our position. And an engagement like this, that's why we take such invitations seriously and also engage the public and also the decision makers in our lobbying strategy. So to add to that, yes, we can do more, but that is the way to go. And I can give a clear example on the excise duty that was one of the taxes that was tabled. And in that engagement, the intent of the said excise duty was then targeted at concentrate, fruit juice concentrates. However, if you carefully look at the Ghana Statistical Services report, it does indicate fruit juice as about a second driver of inflation. Nonetheless, in that excise duty implementation, we had indicated to government that when you implement this excise duty, it affects factories like Ekumfi, factories like Blue Skies, because the intention of the said excise duty tax was to target concentrate, which is mostly imported, and it affects the import inflation that drives inflation high. So to a particular policy like that, we expect an exemption for the local industries and local farmers that are producing pineapples, all the fruits that is converted. If you do not tweak it like that and you implement such a policy, you go to kill local industries. So some policies has good intention for a manufacturer because it gives some favorable competitiveness to producers. But if you implement it blunt like that without giving the exemptions what is needed and you do not listen to us, then you create the confusions around it. So that engagement matters. And he asks the question, so what is our expectation in the tax handles in the incoming budget? If you carefully read the program report of the IMF, the drive of IMF currently on this issue is to do what they call the medium-term tax revenue strategy. That suggests to you that they have high appetite to go out there to rake in more taxes. And on the cliche that our tax to GDP is low. Our tax to GDP is low, and I'm very grateful.
Of course, when you look at the sub-region, there would be comparatives that we can deal with.
But you need to situate it, and that's why I agree with Professor Bokpin on that aspect of the argument. You should realize that where there's high informality, and an economy is a highly informal economy.
Extremely.
There's a correlation between that and industrialization. And when the industrialization is low, of course, we cannot create jobs. And the Ghana Statistical Service has demonstrated that there's high import inflation. That goes to tell you that our productive base has been weakened. And if your productive base is weakened, there'll be high informality, there'll be low taxes. So you need to look at the structure of the economy. Where there are rigidities, we keep repeating that, it must be fixed. It can be fixed through the agriculture sector. And I was excited to see the Obatampa project in the previous budget. Actualizing the Obatampa project, it's a challenge. We can say that there are slippages to program execution as they roll out in budget.
It's also cost intensive.
However, that is the sort of intervention we expect beyond the IMF stability. They should find the funding from World Bank, Africa Development Bank to unlock that rigidity in that agriculture space and make sure that that concept ties in with the value addition, ties in with integrated, value chain supply, and that ecosystem becomes an opportunity to untie that rigidity that will lead to the inflationary basket being dropped. And the statistician has demonstrated beyond reasonable doubt that the trends are on the food basket, the beverages, and how do you untie it? That's why we're against the excise duty, and as I've explained earlier on. So for you to untie that in this medium-term budget as a policy intervention, Obatampa project is a good initiative.
Okay.
Find the funding, get a gang around it. National service personnel are sitting home doing nothing. We have the human resource to execute that. That can become an opportunity to unlock it. And therefore, to influence the tax handles. Our expectations in this current document of the IMF, that is the foundation upon which this medium-term budget will be rolled out, is to look out for new growth poles. And therefore, I'm giving you a clear example about the Obatampa project.
Right.
If you put in funding, you could go in there and tax that aspect of the project to rake in fund. But as it is now, we have a very weak processing and capacity as industry. And the productive sector currently is very weak. And it has been demonstrated by the statistician that the total of imports now is higher than the domestic production. And what the implications are is that, as a matter of fact, when we go into the peak season, exchange rate factors will shoot up again.
And that is exactly what we're trying to avoid, because when we get to that point, and it happens during different portions of the year, especially getting close to the end of the year, then we're going to be in very heady waters. But there's a message that comes through from Samuel Owusu-Ajay, and he says, the internal audit bill is very important. We get the revenue, but the internal controls. Please ask Parliament. Let me briefly bring into the conversation Yawapi Alate. He's a partner financial advisor at Deloitte. Mr. Late, a very good afternoon to you.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good to have you join the conversation. Now, you're joining a bit while we've gone neck deep into it, but I'd just like to find out from you right off the bat, What is your appreciation of the IMF program on the real sector of the economy? And to add to that briefly, do you feel this administration, this government has exhibited enough leadership skills in resolving our economic challenges?
Well, so thank you very much. I guess for anybody who's been in Ghana over the last 2 decades, appreciate the fact that we've gone through several programs, not only with the IMF, but even with other institutions as well. You'll notice that it's a vicious cycle. We do the wrong things, quote unquote, and then they'll take us back to the IMF, and then you correct, and then we go back again. I think what's important is that IMF programs bring to the picture policy credibility. And you can see it reflected in other indicators, as in the exchange rate will remain fairly stable. You would have inflation, if it's gone at all-time high, trending downwards, even though there are a few things that have to be addressed in the current situation that you find ourselves. So even the inflation is supposed to be trickling down or going down, it's not going down because of other factors. But generally, we have some stability in prices. And obviously, that gives us the opportunity historically to go and then create another situation where we are able to borrow or get additional funding. What we haven't dealt with, and obviously answering your question to leadership from government, it's the factors that took us to the IMF and that has historically taken us to the IMF, which I'll outline. First one is our low revenue base and lack of diversified source of revenue. So our revenue base has significantly been skewed towards taxation. And I hear all the complaints by industry associations. And so we've always dwelt on taxation. And you realize that in the last 2 budgets that was presented, you were expecting to rake in about 100 billion Ghana cedis. 77 billion of that was supposed to come from taxes. So 77% of your tax was supposed to finance your total expenditure for the year. That was, in my view, very high risk that you're taking because you have not diversified your revenue sources. So our inability to diversify our revenue source, not only with the current government, but even for successive governments, it's one of the challenges that we are facing today. And if you don't tackle that problem head on, you will continue to have issues. The second issue has been our public debt. So we have increased our public debt significantly in the last few years, mainly on account of a number of factors. Some of them are systemic. So I would say, for example, the exchange rate, as your local currency depreciated, your external debt increased. So our external debt has increased roughly by 100 billion in the last 3 years because our local currency has depreciated. And you can see that reflected. But there are some issues that I would say it's within the control of government, which obviously created or resulted in that. I would say of the first one is where there were 3 issues. So one is the energy sector issue. So we've had issues in the energy sector. We have to address that. And
you mean the IPPs?
Yes, so the IPPs. So the independent power producers. The second has been our issue with the financial sector. So we try to do the financial sector bailout, financial sector reforms. That also created another debt burden of about 25 billion. And then the third has been, so you have the IPP issue, you have the energy sector issue, and then you have what you will say, some of the issues that we haven't dealt with properly in other sectors of the economy. So if you fail to address these 3 or 4 challenges domestically, you would see that your problem or your debt is compounded over the period. So if you don't address the issues, so one of the issues that came to mind, which is unforeseen, was COVID. So the 3, energy sector, COVID expenditure, and then our energy sector debt.
Okay.
These, our financial sector debt, these are the things that culminated in the challenges that we had in compounding our debt. So you have not dealt with our public sector debt. You have not dealt with our revenue source, which is low. And then we have not also dealt with our challenge with government. So the last one is government not being able to have majority in parliament. So where you are not able to control or have control over parliament and have certain policies passed, you have challenges. So this is what has created the problems in the last few years that you realize that that's what we have to go through and navigate through with the IMF program.
All right. A very quick one. I want you to make this very brief before I go back to Professor Bokpin. Who then is to blame from where you sit? Where do we lay the blame? After all, we elect leaders to solve our problems. And in this instance, we're told many things on the economic landscape. Where do we lay the blame? Very briefly on this. So I go to Prof.
Okay, so I would say it's a combination of external and then our internal issues. So first is our plan. So if you have a long-term plan and stick the long-term plan, you have a challenge. The second is our inability to create some form of
Okay, so Mr. Lartey, the connection is not that good. I'm struggling to hear you, but I hear you talk about a long-term plan. Let's try again, see whether it will be better. Mr. Lartey.
Yes, it's better.
Okay, I think the connection is still bad. So let me go to Professor Bokpin, and then I will come back into the studio. Prof, are you still with us? Hello, Professor Bokpin.
Yes, I'm here. Good afternoon.
Okay, great. Good to have you join the conversation again. Now, as we move forward, we'd like to find out what your expectations would be as far as the mid-year budget review is concerned. There's a lot to talk about. We've spoken about what your anticipations are in terms of the macroeconomic targets. But moving forward, what would be your expectations when the budget is presented proper in terms of industry, in terms of taxation? I mean, do you think it's time for this government, for example, to spend more, hence requiring additional funds in the mid-year budget presentation? Or is that something we should stay away from?
I think that there wasn't enough consultation with private sector, Ghanaians broadly, in the run-up to the discussion of the IMF program and all of that. And I think what the mid-year budget review should do is to mirror the concerns of Ghanaians, especially the private sector, the SME, that represent the job creation capacity of our economy. If you want growth to be sustainable, growth to be inclusive, you have to align your budget and your fiscal policy strategy to create that enabling platform for the private sector that is supposed to be the engine of growth. If you want to move more towards greater economic transformation and inclusive productivity growth, then you have to align your fiscal strategy with the private sector. So what I'm expecting is that government will have to take another look at the tax measures in the 2023 budget. It's very, very important. It will not serve our interest to actually collapse businesses or push them to relocate from this country, or in the name of macroeconomic stability. No, it doesn't work that way. It will not work that way. So I'm expecting that government will be reasonable in the revisions to the tax measures, and so that we rather focus more attention on tax compliance, administrative reforms and tax compliance as a way of increasing our tax revenue rather than burdening the faithful few as we have done over the years. One surprising thing that perhaps, our government is capable of anything is that we have said so much about necessary governance reforms that our democracy is too expensive. We cannot bear it. It's crippling private sector. It's crippling households. Now it's affecting Ghana's middle class. If you look at the effect of the domestic debt exchange, you see that the abuse of tax revenue and all of that is no longer enough. The state is now after our investments. The state is now after our savings. What that tells you is that democracy is good, but the way we are operationalizing our democracy is unsustainable. So we have to find a fine balance between our expenditure line, how much we spend in governance cost, and how much we are able to free up for growth enhancing spending.
Right.
If we design a system that is solely supposed to make government comfortable, is to come at the expense of private sector and households. And since 1992, the whole strategy of fiscal policy, monetary policy, is just to make government comfortable. And that is coming at the expense of private sector and households.
Right.
And that is why you see that businesses are complaining, households are complaining, but everything is how government can balance their balance sheet. And year in, year out, across the two major regimes, you see that government is doing is to make life comfortable for their followers and political party actors, whilst the critical engines of the economy, where job creation can come from, is rather being suffocated. We cannot make it this way. We cannot tax our way out of poverty. The taxes are already too high in Ghana.
Okay.
It's affecting savings level. It's affecting investment level. And until we do something drastic about it, we will not make progress. Then I'll come to the IMF program. If you look at the design, the IMF itself acknowledges that they could have done better in the area of expenditure cuts. I'm looking forward to the media review, government sending the right and appropriate signal that they are looking at wasteful expenditure, and these are the measures they are putting in place in terms of reform of state-owned enterprises, because they are too inexpensive.
All right.
Look at the energy sector. With that level of inefficiency, it doesn't matter the pricing formula you put in place. There will always be problems.
Okay. Let me come into the studio now. Joseph Obeng of Guta is here. You heard Dr. Karewe talk about the inputs when it comes to agriculture, labor and everything. And even worse, the fact that now your land is polluted, your water is polluted. On the back of Galamsey, if you're going into it, many problems. What are the problems, apart from the taxes, the utility tariffs, what are the real problems you face in terms of importation, and what would be some of your expectations on the back of that? Taxes, for example, are you expecting some of them to go in the mid-year budget review?
Yeah, what we should all know is that a vibrant private sector drives any economy in the world. So it is important that we create the enabling environment that will make businesses thrive so that we take the whole economy along. And that is what we are not getting right now. That rather the private sector is being contained and that they are unable to expand. We don't have even the space to develop and grow. And that has been the problem, because the excessive taxation, this is what it does to the private sector, because we are not competitive. If even we want to produce as a nation, we cannot overprice our produce, that we cannot even sell our produce to the neighboring countries because of cost of the produce, like the manufacturers have been complaining about. And that's why we continue complaining about excessive taxation. And we can easily also expand the tax net without necessarily putting a lot of pressure or imposing taxes on the few that have the capacity even to grow, because they are the identified ones who can actually pay the taxes. But when we do that, we are only trying to stifle the growth of those industries which otherwise will be the driving force of our economy. Now we're talking about importation. Importation, I have a serious problem with importation, because if we do more importation, it means that we are not helping our local manufacturing companies. We are not even trying to be self-sufficient.
But that is what you do.
Yes, I like that. But let me also tell you that the import that happens in this Ghana, we do not own this economy. Ghanaians do not own this economy.
That is true.
That
is a fact.
The export earnings, we owe only about 60% as a nation. The rest does not belong to Ghanaians. That's why we always have the problem of foreign exchange, because it goes and it does not even come, because the money does not belong to us. export that importation that we do, the excessive importation, only about 20% is for the indigents. Over 20% and the 80% all belong to foreigners. And so, whilst we are talking about exports being in the hands of foreigners, the foreign dominance of this economy, you think about communication. This communication industry, the money that goes there, even the banking is not in our hands. We talk about oil, we talk about gold and all that. We are not getting the benefit thereof. And that we have to even think about that. So if we think that we are doing excessive importation, that is not helping the economy, there's a way to do that. That's what we have to use our regulations, our investment laws, and the rules and regulations to contain excessive importation. Now we are talking about import substitution. It's in the right direction. If we are able to identify where we have the comparative advantage as a nation and even support those industries so that we become a hub of manufacturing of those identified products, then of course we have a way. And then, of course, government should do everything so that Ghanaian businesses or investment, foreign direct investment, should be tied up with the local businesses.
Okay.
Otherwise, we do not have any retention here, and all is taken out. And we always complain about our forests.
We're going to have to go to Studio 997. I have a lot more for you in that particular respect, what your real expectations are in the budget. And just hold for me Nuong Falong and, of course, Dr. Ayim Dake. When we come back to the Joy News studio, we'll address more concerns. But for now, let's head to Studio 997. George Wiafe is on hand with Edward Karewe and Mr. Bedu Abwaje. Over to you, George.
Interesting deliberations there in TV in terms of their expectations and what they want, and also the bit about the taxes and all those. But let me come back to my guest in studio, my Bedu Abwaje and Mr. Edward Karewe. And I know that it happens for the major budget. You know, this is initially supposed to be a mid-year review of estimates, and now it appears it could be a major review. And there are even strong indications that maybe the minister could look at a supplementary budget and all those things. Mark, let me start with you first. Ghana National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Has there been any kind of engagement to try and seek your inputs as in what should this, because I know this is not a major budget, but has there been any informal engagements to kind of get your inputs before this presentation?
Not at all. I think that the ministry has been very poor with consultation. And we experienced that during the IMF program where we were not well consulted. Ordinarily, whenever the budget is like being prepared and is going to be read, I mean, there are consultations, they bring stakeholders together. For this particular one, nobody has consulted us or contacted us, but we have developed our own proposal and sent it to them. As whether they will take it or not is a different thing.
Taking it to
but I think that this particular budget review is not a normal review that we've been having, because there's going to be a total shift in policy direction in terms of fiscal policy, and I expected that they will consult the major stakeholders. I have a feeling, and I know it comes to reality, that almost all the targets that you have set in the 2023 budget we will not be able to even achieve one of them. Inflation, talk about fiscal deficit, all those targets that we have set for GDP and the rest, we will not be able to achieve it. And a proper supplementary budget for me will be fair, so that the variances will not be that huge. That will affect projections going forward. But they should learn to consult key stakeholders under this circumstance.
Mr. Karewe, has there been any, and it's good to make that distinction that unlike a major budget budget presentation where these inputs are sought, this is supposed to be initially reviewing the estimates and informing Parliament on how the first quarter has done and all the rest. So my argument, has there been even any informal engagement with you? We are hearing even reports about import quota and all the rest for rice and chicken and all those things, and likely that it could be captured in the media review. Has there been any informal engagement on your side to ensure that when it comes to any review for the policy measures in the sector, you're not taken by surprise where you just wake up one morning and then there's a major policy review being announced in the media budget?
Yeah, I think that Aboagye has already indicated that there's poor consultation so far as government attitude to consultation is concerned. And I can now expect that since this is a review, a mid-year review, where they are not mandated or required to necessarily make consultations, they have not come to us on this. But what I'm just...
Maybe you take the lead in making the proposals to them.
Well...
or lobbying.
Yes, of course. You see, there are problem frustration sometimes comes not because we expect government to come to us.
Yeah.
We know that it is our government. We can also get to government. Sometimes, I'm telling you, you write letters upon letters and they will not even acknowledge them, let alone to invite you for consultation. Yeah, so we leave that. So, because it's a review, I don't expect any major changes to be made in this. Because I'm just wondering, within this period to the end of the year, what government can achieve,
you think nothing will
such that they would like to have a major changes. I know when you talk about the budget goes with resources. I'm not sure where the resources are coming from, because when you make any policy decisions, radical or major policy decisions, they go with resources. And I don't know where government has suddenly gotten that those resources to be able to allow for a major review in our budget. I think what government should do is to try and keep this budget on until the next review, because we have just entered into the IMF program.
And just for an update of our viewers and listeners, 2024 budget presentation will be done in November.
In November. So if they make a major budget review today, what are they going to achieve? So it is better for them to ensure that the 2024 budget actually addresses so much. But when it comes to taxes and so on, of course, I know that it's an area that government will not listen much on. Because given the history of taxes, when we cried foul and said governments will change, it took government a long time before they did. So I don't expect that there will be a review downwards of taxes and the rest.
Let's come again to food-related policy measures. We've seen a spike in food inflation in the Ghana Statistical Service data as well. We're here to get to the harvest season. I know the problems that are in the sector and whether the policy measures are getting it right. But for you, what should be done using the media review to deal with the food-related challenges when it comes to a policy measure dealing with that challenge?
Well, I think that what can be done is to increase investment. We are already in the major harvesting period of the southern sector of the country. We're going into the minor season for the southern sector in the end of the year, and then the major harvest for the northern sector. You can see that food prices are still going up and food inflation is still dominating.
Why does that happen? And I stand to be educated. Because I thought that with us getting to the harvest season, even the minor and all the rest, that would deal with the problem. But it appears that rather import inflation is driving the food thing. So instead of getting my normal corn here, even corn is imported, coupled with the taxes at the pot, shooting up the prices.
For this year, in particular, there's already low investment in agriculture from the beginning of the year. So if you invest less, you cannot expect more. Even where you invest more, it's not automatic that necessarily your output will be good enough. So that is what we are experiencing. So for government now getting this signal, which information has come from the government statistician, and you can see that even in that particular message, you also entreated government to investigate, the challenges, the causes of the change in trend. Because the normal trend is that once we are getting into the harvesting zone, prices will come down. Food inflation will come down. But unfortunately, it's rather the opposite. So there's something unique that is causing that, and government must investigate that. But to address it without necessarily saying that is the only solution, is to increase investment to make sure that the minor and the major harvesting season or production for the country is addressed somehow, because it takes about 4 months maximum to grow maize, to grow this and most of the food items. So if we increase our investment now, we are likely to get an appreciable increase in output.
And is the outlook for you that good for the sector, that in terms of having the right policy measures, we can be assured of food security, or still the red signs are up there?
Yeah, food security is the ultimate, but and we should not expect...
Are we making progress in that area?
We are making progress, because as we are already aware, the information on the ground is that food prices are going up, and food prices is leading the inflation, national inflation. So it means there's a major problem. So we are not making progress. However, we can mitigate the rate at which this problem goes up by increasing investment now.
And sorry to cut you, but with the onset of the harvest season coming in, would that actually dampen this whole idea about food prices going up a little bit going forward? Maybe in August and September, we expect that the food inflation bit will dampen a little bit, will slow a little bit.
Yeah, it's supposed to.
And that's the expectation.
Yeah, that's the expectation.
Mr. Magbaduapachi, I mean, for you made several. You have a lot of expectation, and that is supposed to better your situation going forward. What if at the end of the day, all these proposals are not taken on by government? I mean, what are you planning to do? How are you planning to survive? You talked about some of your members going down and all the rest. How are you going to survive? What is the plan B? Because some are saying that under a fund program, well, we have our own challenges.
Yes, I think it will be in the...
Well, back in the Joy News studio, unfortunately, there's a technical glitch there, but let's get to the chase. Nuong, so I had wanted to go to you right before the break. I'd like to find out from your end, in terms of improving funding to the SME sector. We know that our industry is already bleeding. What has the move been to support the SME sector, where you find yourself? And should such funding be targeted at unicorns in your various industries?
So where funding is concerned, we've heard of a lot of interventions. There have been some interventions that we have applied to, but I have never benefited from any funding that has been issued by government. And so it's quite difficult to speak on that. We know it's out there. We know it's being deployed by some agencies at certain times. And we have applied. We've done our part. We haven't.
There's recently the GSDF. I don't know whether you've heard of that.
No, I haven't heard of that. Which one is that?
Well, it's one of those being run by the TVET. Yes, the GSDF.
Right.
They are giving quite a number of, huge funds to different. Today, when I was reading, I think over 800,000 to homegrown entities. I think corporate ones also. There's quite a range, 88,000 to others.
Okay, so let me just note down that one, and then that will be one that will soon apply to. Thank you so much. I see. I think with these funding, we need a bit more education. Some other entrepreneurs need a bit more education on how they can position themselves better for funding, because I'm saying this because I want to assume that so far we've been doing something wrong that has made us ineligible for these funds. It's also important that we decentralize these funding opportunities so that if we have it at a national level, for example, you can break it down into regional, into district levels. And for example, the Ghana Enterprise Agency has different branch level and district level offices, which I think can be empowered to deal directly with the entrepreneurs because they know them. and are able to personally assess them better. As for unicorns, I think unicorns emerge from the environment. So when there's an enabling environment, then unicorns emerge. If any business is still in operation in this economic situation and still pays employees, then they are doing something really good. I dare say they are all unicorns. If you're still in operation, you are a unicorn, because there are a lot of issues that we have to deal with. I was even connecting with what the farmers were saying, because when it comes to cosmetics, it's still agro-based, because a lot of our raw materials are agro-based, oils, butters, botanicals. These are all gotten from the farmers. So once there's a lot of local inflation also, we're directly affected. You find that in the last year to last 6 months, our cost of production has literally quadrupled, because you're buying a liter of coconut oil, for example, at a certain price, and before you know it, the price has gone up, considerably, which directly impacts your cost of production, which means that you have to increase prices. And if you're increasing prices and the people you're selling to, they do not even have the money to come and purchase, that's a whole different problem. It means you've produced, but the products are not moving as well as they should. So create the environment that is required, and unicorns will emerge, because people are serious about doing business. There's a lot of encouragement from government for people to go into entrepreneurship. But when you talk to entrepreneurs, they'll tell you, there's some entrepreneurs, like I have had days when I wake up and wonder, oh my goodness, why am I doing this? But you have invested so much into the business that you cannot just get up and fold up and say, oh, I'm done, and that's it. Because you also need to recoup what you've invested at the very least. So I believe that we're all unicorns, and we all need the right environment to shine.
Do hold for me, Nuong, and the rest of the team. We'll be coming back to you with some of your concluding thoughts. Nuong, when I come back, I will come back to you to find out about what can be done to help you scale up as SMEs and also boost your fortunes as far as the Africa Free Trade Area is concerned. But we'll take a bit of a breather, and then we'll return into the studio to cap off from here before we hand over to Studio 997. Welcome back. You're still live on the Joy Business Pre-Budget Forum. What are your expectations? What do you want to see in the mid-year budget review? I was on Nuong Falong, and Nuong, I don't know whether you are aware of this, but some of the banks are giving loans to entities like yours, the SMEs, at 10% interest. I don't know whether you are not aware of them since you've been looking around, but just something for you to contemplate. But to cap off the conversation from your end, I'd like to find out, is government doing enough to support SMEs like yours in terms of scaling up, meeting export standards, and fitting into the African Free Trade Area? And again, what will your expectations be when we have that mid-year budget review? It appears we've lost Nuong Falong. So I'll come to you, Mr. Lartey. What then? All right, so Mr. Lartey too not with us. Let's come into the studio, and then I'll try to see whether we have Prof in there. I don't believe you had the last bite, did you?
Yes,
you did. Dr. Ayim Dake. So from your end, what would your expectations be? There's been a lot that we've discussed. What are the practical things you want to see in the mid-year budget review in terms of tax policy, in terms of things to boost industry?
All right. One is that the exemption bill as it stands now,
the tax exemption
law that has been renewed, a number of industrialists apply for this tax exemption, and by virtue of the IMF program that we're running, there's a lot of frustration, and members want me to echo this position to the hearing of the finance minister, because through GIPC and all other agencies, it's all been consolidated under the Ministry of Finance, and members and the industrialists are being frustrated in going through this process. We should bear in mind that the IMF program is a transitional program running for about 3 years. Beyond this transitional program, there is an economy we need to run. After the macro stability, there is an economy we need to run. We cannot seek what we call the sacrificing of local industries at the expense of revenue mobilization and IMF conditionalities. Because beyond the transitional program, what next? That is why an issue of the exemption that I just raised. These are how we build up our capacity in our productive sectors, that beyond the transitional program, we can still survive and run our industries. And with these same machineries that we need, that's when we can boost our productive capacity and reverse the import inflation that has become a trend now, and make sure that our domestic productivity capacity goes on. What it does, it creates employment, it creates jobs, it creates a tax to GDP ratio, which will definitely shoot up. It helps correct the informality of the economy. The infrastructural deficit will be corrected, on and on and on. And may I also say that beyond that, I recall the president, once upon a time in one of his deliveries, mentioned that strategic product, there is a will of government to tie up with private sector to develop strategic product like rice, like corn, the cereals, so that we reverse the imports gap that part of our
came
deficit.
To the fore when we were facing our.
So we want to see it. We want to see it in the medium term,
and that has not.
Well, it's never too late. We want to see it in the medium term paper, and it's all part of the Obatampa project. And to us, that is one of the routes to unlock this what we call the rigidities in the inflationary basket. We have used monetary policy tools many times, but on and on we get it difficult. And so we do a coordinated agriculture project that will give an interlink between the supply value chain and the value addition process, well coordinated, and support the ecosystem with transportation, silos, parking, and redistribution like we used to do under what we call the Ghana Food Distribution Project way back. That system must be picked up, regulated. There are market failures in that space. When there was market failure in the what we call the fuel market, the deregulated oil and gas market, and the presidency introduced gold for oil. Part of the intentions was to regulate the space and correct market failures. When there was market failures in the financial market, that's what is landed this year. There's market failure in the agriculture space. That is making it very difficult for the inflationary basket to drop. We need a coordinated approach to unlock the rigidities in those spaces. And then with that, with all the other tools of the monetary policy, we pray that the inflation basket will drop. We insist on that because it is connected to lending rate, reference rate, exchange rate, on and on and on. We need that inflation basket to drop. And it's our wish that we'll see this concrete project reflecting in the medium-term budget. And then we mentioned a few tax reviews that I don't want to belabor that we've stated now and again. We've tabled our paper to the Minister of Finance, and we pray they'll be considered for review. One more thing we need to
really pressed for time.
One more we present papers, but sometimes the challenge is that do they comprehend? Do they integrate it in their policy document? That is another issue.
So sometimes as industry, you speak to them, the powers that be.
We do speak to them every night.
But they basically throw away what you say. The bit about silos, though, I mean, since the Nkrumah era, I don't know what we've done as far as agriculture is concerned. Joseph Oping, your take in about some 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes.
High taxes are counterproductive to our industrialization drive. It's as simple as that. We are doing 1D, 1F, but we cannot overprice the produce thereof. If we do that, we have failed.
Okay.
That's why we have to prune down on taxes. That's why even the present government understand that over-taxation impedes the growth of businesses and impedes productivity. So if you are aware of that, then we have to prune down the taxes to make businesses competitive so that the produce that turns up can be sold to our neighboring countries and it will make us rich. We normally say that the tax to GDP in the sub-region, ours is the least. Yes, because we pay high tax, that does not induce compliance. Those other areas, the taxes that they pay does not match up to ours. They are very minimal, and that it ensures compliance, and that's why they have been able to achieve the tax to GDP of 18% and above that we are now taking. So we have to be innovative, expand the tax net, and that we do not impose taxes on those that are capable of paying the taxes, and that will not induce compliance. And then the VAT...
This should be your final bit.
Yeah, the VAT, as it is structured now, that is not uniform. And that we should restructure the VAT system to be uniform so that there will be parity of sort. Because the system as it is now is not ensuring compliance, and it's not helping business and government at that. And that we should also do that and remove the threshold that is associated with it.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Obeng. Let me bring in Professor Bokpin, and we cap off the conversation from the Joy News studio. For you, Prof, what are the crucial areas, thematic areas you would like to see addressed, tax handles among others, in the mid-year budget review?
I think that there are already too many taxes, and government needs to take another look. And the complaint is quite obvious. It's not
which taxes should go? Which taxes should go?
I'm thinking that e-levy should go.
E-levy should go.
I've never liked it. Yes, I've never liked it, and I don't think I'm going to like it. And then also, government should decouple, should merge the straight levies with the standard VAT rate. If it quakes like a duck, it's a duck. Let's not call it something else. So let's merge the straight levies with the standard VAT rate and peg it at below 18%. Because if you look at what the decoupling is doing, is to make it look like Ghana's standard VAT rate is low. But effectively, on the consumer, it's more than 21%. So let's merge that. And then let's peg it at below 18%. We are also aligning it with the rates within the African continent, because we are talking about the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade. So one critical area is to look at the VAT decoupling. Let's merge it, peg it at below 18%. Then also, let's also look at the backdoor approach. You will see the corporate tax rate, government is quoted at 25%. Then we have introduced backdoor approach like banking sector recovery levy, growth and sustainability levy. If you put the effective tax rate is more than 35%, that is quite high on another level. Then, so that we can then focus a bit more attention in the area of compliance. We see that GRA has deployed EVAT and the rest of them. We need to scale up on those ones. So there's greater room to collect more tax revenue through administrative reform and compliance rather than from policy level. And that is one level we need to look at it. Then the other thing we need to also do in this...
Prof, this has to be your final point.
I agree with your panelists that it's not a normal budget review, okay? It has to signal a certain direction that offers comfort and hope. There's too much complaining in the system, and it's justified. It's because really businesses are suffocating, and we need to align the whole fiscal strategy to give greater comfort.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor Godfred Bokpin. So those who joined the conversation from this end, Professor Bokpin, economist, lecturer of finance at the University of Ghana. We also have from the AGI, Dr. Humphrey Ayim Dake. From Guta, Joseph Obeng. Yao Apia Latte is a partner and financial advisor with Deloitte. And Nuam Falong joined us on Zoom. She is CEO of Etheria. I am Benjamin Akako, and I'm handing over now with this pre-budget forum to George Weafe in Studio 997.
So much, Ben, and we here, that is Mr. Macbidwa Baji and Edward Carway with the General Agricultural Workers Senior. Mr. Carway, I mean, before I just take your final thoughts as you wrap up on this discussion. I mean, we're picking up information that there's a likelihood that government could look at an input quota being announced in the mid-year budget review in terms of putting some restrictions on imports in terms of rice and chicken. Quick thoughts on that one in a minute, and then I get your final thoughts.
Well, a quota is always important, but then it is the way you use it, because it's a developmental tool. So if there's going to be a quota on rice and then chicken, then of course we must also be certain that local production is boosted to be able to meet the shortfall in the imports. Otherwise, it could lead to further price hikes in the coming months.
Mr. Magbudu, your final thoughts as we wrap up this discussion on this media budget review.
Well, I think government should do everything possible to bring some relief to businesses. Some taxes that I want to see, some abolished and some review. One is the e-levy. I think that the rate is too high. The other one has to do with the COVID tax. I don't know why we still have COVID tax or COVID levy as part of our tax structure, after it has been declared by the WHO that COVID is not a pandemic. We have to take this tax out to bring some relief to businesses. Secondly, if you look at our policy document nowadays, there's a general statement that you are going to create a conducive environment for businesses. We all know what a conducive environment is. Low taxes, low inflation, lower interest rates, lower utility tariffs. With all the things that are happening, I don't think that we are going to have that immediately. So that general statement, I personally do not want to see it. They should come out with specifics on how they are going to create this conducive environment for businesses. Because we need that to predict for the rest of the year and then the next year. If they come out with ambitious policies, ambitious targets that are not achievable, and we use that for our predictions, it's not going to be helpful for us. So they should be very realistic with us that this is the situation, this is what the targets are. So the businesses will now take it and use it for their projection. In fact, there is an opportunity for government to come out with some mitigation measures for businesses. The businesses are ready. In spite of the difficulties, we are still doing what we have to do. We are creating the jobs and other things. But if you make it too difficult, then you'll find an alternative way and that will definitely help us.
Mr. Kara, your final thoughts?
Well, I think that the mid-year review should look at lifting the ban on employment, because it is an obnoxious policy to tell people that, look, you are looking for jobs, I am not going to employ you. When you yourself, you are employed, living on the taxpayers' money, you say you will not employ any other person. They should first and foremost, if they don't want to employ anybody, then they should lay themselves off, and then it will be justified that Ghana is sad, and then no more employment. We also want that they should take off some exports. You know, this freelance exportation of raw materials, which are critical for production within the country, they should stop that. And we also think that they must also increase investment in agriculture within this period, because the short-term investment, the returns are great, because with agriculture, some of the food items, short-term investment is still good for them. So we should increase those investments within the mid-year budget review.
Increasing investment. Mr. Edward Karowa is the General Secretary of the General Agricultural Workers Union. Magbudu Abuaji is the Chief Executive of the Ghana National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And on TV side, we also heard from Professor Godfrey Bokpin. He is an economist and a finance lecturer at the University of Ghana Business School. Yaolati is a partner at a finance and accounting firm Deloitte, and also Nyon Flan. She's the CEO of Athra, and these had been our distinguished guests who join us for our Joy Business pre-budget forum, as we looked at the economic transformation, what should be the policy direction in the mid-year budget review, that is 2023, and make this station your budget station for all the analysis as you lead up to the mid-year budget review and also even post budget analysis. Joy 99.7 FM and Joy News. Have a great day. My name is George Jaffe. I did this together with Benjamin Akakpo.